John.
Righto. Well, good morning, everyone, and sorry for that bit of a blip. I think I've done about 60 of these in the last few months, and this is the first time we've had such a serious technological blip. But nonetheless, look, let me get into this talk fairly quickly because we've lost some time. The subject this morning is future-proofing supply chains for risk and resilience. I'm mainly going to be talking about the resilience side because it's very relevant in the context of what's been happening with COVID around the world. I'll say something about risk, but the risk component will largely be taken up by my colleague Deborah Ellis, who's my fellow partner and researcher in the firm, and she'll talk a lot more about that in a couple of hours when she speaks. So before I get underway, let me say a few things off the cuff here to really give you a sense of the way I'm thinking after being in the supply chain arena for the last 4 decades. The way I see it, and you know, the insights I've got now is supply chains are agnostic. It doesn't matter what they're carrying; they still get the job done. And it's fascinating to see the audience. You know, the mix you've got, the big MNCs, the smaller, small to medium-sized companies, the spread of industries, high tech, oil and gas, humanitarian, pharma, government, financial institutions, which is what I'd expect to see. But congratulations to SAPEX for attracting such a broad brethren of companies for this particular event. But essentially, I look at the world these days not through the specialism of supply chain, but look through the eyes of a business. Because at the end of the day, when you look at businesses around the world, generally speaking, 80% of the capital investment is really supply chain investment. If you add in the cost of capital investment in manufacturing, in DCs and other facilities, it's 80%. And working capital, it's around 60% of the firm's working capital in inventory and other things is very much in supply chain. So in many ways, and you may think this is a little bit biased, but I'm exaggerating to demonstrate, supply chains are the business. I mean, in many ways, they're the central nervous system. They're like the threads that run through the business and connect the internal parts of the business with the external parts being on the supply side, at the back end, and at customers at the front end. So I'd like to suggest that it's about time, and it is happening, thankfully, with COVID, that the organisations start to act in concert. We forget about functions, and we realise that we're all part of the supply chain, and each function in the business makes a contribution to that supply chain, which is the flow of product and services across the business from source right through to customer satisfaction. Now, as I said earlier, the COVID-19 crisis has materially improved the amount of collaboration that's happening inside the firm, and it's also happening between companies in the channel. So I'd like to just finish this sort of introductory comment by saying that, you know, in many ways, I'm wanting, you folks to sort of adopt and understand the distinction between the supply chain that does the work and a supply chain philosophy that everyone, marketing, finance, production, everyone must adopt the supply chain philosophy, because unless we are all doing our bit and contributing value as the product and service moves across the firm horizontally and out to the customer, then the customer is not going to be, not be satisfied. Now, as we look at sort of the last 50 years, it's a bit of a short history. We've had our crises. They started right back in 73 with the oil crisis. We've had the dot-com revolution, SARS, the global financial crisis in 2007, 8, 9, and of course COVID. Now COVID's the big one because it's completely global. It's affected everyone at the same time. And I think what I would say going into this conversation is that none of us can assume going forward that we're not going to have more of these dramatic and extreme disruptions. And as such, we need to be starting to think of ways of coping with them apart from the normal day-to-day that we are building our supply chains for. Now, of course, we were starting to be concerned about vulnerability in the supply chain even before COVID. COVID has brought it to a head. The rationalisation of the supply base that's been going on, the broad globalisation of sourcing in the search of ever lower pricing, centralisation of production to get scale up and reduce costs, and the same thing. I know companies that have reduced their numbers of production centres and distribution centres around the world by literally hundreds. They've cut them in half. Now, that's good. It cuts costs, but you've got to realise that the more you go down that track, the more brittle you make your supply chains, given the sorts of extreme disruptions that we're just now witnessing. So, and going forward, cybersecurity is going to bring the same sort of disruption, and we haven't seen anything like we're going to see going forward in that. And I suppose it was well summed up by Jim Collins, who talks about we're in for or entering a long period of what he calls ferocious instability. And what that means is that we just have to find ways of coping with normal volatility and at the same time prepare ourselves for extreme volatility. So sort of leaving those thoughts with you, coming back and saying, well, what can we do? Start thinking about that. Well, one thing we can do is not continue to operate in the way we've been operating for the last 50 years, where we've been essentially designing our supply chains from inside looking out. We've been doing a one-size-fits-all. It's meant that we've been only aligning with a small percentage of our customers, and for the rest, we've been over-servicing some, which is costly, and for no reward, and for others, we've been under-servicing. And so what we've got to do is, the first step in making ourselves more resilient and risk adverse is to start taking out some of those extraneous losses, start to improve customer satisfaction by giving our customers what they need, no more, no less. And if we do that, we'll find that we'll get rid of the over-servicing, and we'll also start putting some of that saved resources back into those customers who deserve it, our loyal customers, and so revenue will go up. So we've got to start thinking about the supply chain not only as a cost-efficient, not cost-effective capability, but it's got to add 2 or 3% to the top line as well. And one of the reasons we've fallen into this, this approximation over the years, is that we fail to segment our customers in the correct way. We've tended to go down the route like lemmings sort of running over the cliff. Most of us segmenting our customers by institution. We're servicing wholesalers or retailers or, different types of industry sectors. Now, human behaviour being as it is, what we've proven over the last 30 years with our research, that it doesn't matter what sort of institution, whether it's a major retailer or a wholesaler or someone else, that inside a range of those distributors, you will find a mix of buying behaviours. And this is just a representation of that, where we've shown different customer types, institutional types down the left-hand side, and inside that we've shown up to 4 and sometimes 5 different buying behaviours for the same institution. Why? Because institutions all come from different roots. They have different founders, they have different visions, they have different historical cultures, and they have a different mix of people, even though they could be a similar institution. And you'll know that in South Africa by dealing with, if you're a supplier, dealing with some of the big retailers there, you will find some significant differences depending on the category that you are selling them as a supplier. So in many ways, we have to find a template or a way of thinking of the world, and this is what we've come up with in 1989. We call it the dynamic alignment business model. It's not a supply chain model. It's a business model that says if you want to make money, big or small, and I'm talking about the big corporations or the one-man band, then you know that you have to align your company and its capabilities with the market. So the model has 4 levels: the marketplace, which contains customers, competitors, government regulations, all sorts of things. You've got the strategy between ourselves down in here, the strategy itself, which is the underneath the water. The corporation is underneath here with its culture and leadership style. And the thing that joins our company or enterprise with the marketplace is the strategies that we follow. And what we found in our work is that, you can have some great strategies that you can work out, but they fall over because they're not being propelled into the marketplace by the business. And this is because the organisation design is not appropriate, the types of processes we're using, the combinations of technology, all these things which shape the different subcultures don't reflect the subcultures in the marketplace that we're trying to actually service, and therefore get misalignment, therefore, at each of these levels, which creates chaos. So really, the message here today is we've got to turn things around 100%, 180 degrees, and we've got to start thinking of designing our supply chains from the outside looking back in. And that means understanding the buying behaviours and the values that are driving the behaviour of your customers in the marketplace. And once you understand that, you can then reverse engineer back into the company and start changing things like the organisation design, the combinations of technology, the KPIs, the training and development, the processes, and all these things. The problem we've had in the past is that we've been doing all these things but without a frame of reference. We've not had the right frame of reference up in here. Now, to cut things short, because we haven't got a lot of time, what we found is that there are 16 different buying behaviours in the human race, and these will vary, or the combinations will vary depending on the category of product or service that we have in mind. So people will have a different buying behaviour for, say, a car, but the same people could have a different buying behaviour for when they're buying groceries or buying medical care or buying schooling. But to boil it all down, what we found is that these are the 5 buying behaviours that we see everywhere across a whole range of industries globally. And we've proven it, and we've designed global supply chains. And the only thing that changes as you move across the globe is the mix of these things. There'll be a different percentage of collaborative customers versus transactional versus those who are operating in a project mode because they've got project business, the dynamic agile customer mindset, and of course this one over here, which is what we're embracing at the moment, what we call the innovation solutions mindset, which is what people jump into when they have major disruptions. And I'll come back to that one in a little while. And in fact, what we're seeing is that these 4 here tend to be what we call the business as usual type mindsets that we see, where people fall into these type of mindsets. And once we know what these biases are, when we know the characteristics of them, we can actually go inside our business and design our supply chains in the appropriate way to have the mirror image of these. Now, at any time, any of these companies or individuals can have a major disaster, and they change. They move across into an emergency mindset over here, and they ask their suppliers to find solutions for them, and they change their mindset completely. So you could be very transactional buyer. You could be worried about cost and quality. One of your DCs may burn down. You go across to your supplier and say, look, this is what's happened. Can you help me? Don't worry about the cost. Just give me a solution and give it to me fast. And in a macro sort of way, that's what we've been doing with COVID. We've been saying to the pharmaceutical industry, to hell with the cost, to hell with the time, just find a solution to this thing so we can get things back to normal. So once you understand this, then you can start designing your supply chains. And what, therefore, we're arguing is that running through any business, there'll be collaborative supply chains supplying, the 10 or 15% of your customers who are generally collaborative. A lean supply chain for those 40 or 50% of customers who want to buy that way. For those of you who've got project work, there may be 10 or 15% of your customers behave in that way, and some of them can move back and forth. There may be another 20 or 30% who are agile and dynamic and don't share information with you and who just want a response from you. And of course, there are those who just move into this mindset, which is more of a transitory thing. These things tend to be out there all the time. This innovative solutions mindset tends to be there, when you have an emergency. So it looks a bit like this. You're managing your business vertically through functions, but the real action is happening horizontally. And so that's why, I'm arguing, and you may have seen some of my recent blogs on this, that the elephant in the room is really organisation design. We still need to keep our functions, but we also need to second people from these functions into teams which sit at the end of these different types of supply chains and drive them across the business, interacting with the different functions. And people can be seconded in and out of these and have different KPIs when they're in. Because really, at the end of the day, our customers are buying horizontally and we're managing our business vertically. So we're leaving ourselves at 90 degrees misaligned with our customer by expecting our functions to manage vertically and to do the job of horizontally satisfying customers. And so it looks a bit like this, if you want an engineering view. Underneath all this demand, these different customers send different signals. So collaborative customers and customers who tend to buy on a repeat basis tend to, have demand patterns which are pretty flat, base load, we would call it. Those who are in the project mode have a very lumpy demand. Those in agile have a very, sort of spiky demand. And those who get into extreme trouble, we just call that cavitation. And you can see by looking at if we could through the analytics, and we can up to a point see these patterns in the data, but not completely. But if we could, we could separate out the base load and manage it the way it needs to be managed in a very cost-effective way, and then seek to find ways to manage this unpredictable side of the business by having different types of people, systems, processes to do it. And, that sort of sequence, because it all comes together, we can't see the patterns, but nonetheless, when we strip them out, it does have some correlation with the Pareto, with our products. There's no doubt about it that, a small range of our products will represent a big percentage of our revenue. And that's probably going to be, our collaborative customers, our transactional customers, and possibly, some of our project customers. And as you get up to the top end of the Pareto, then you're into this very agile, demanding area where sort of customers are asking for products in a very ad hoc sort of way. And so if there was a way of expressing it, a sort of metaphor for the supply chain that I'm looking at, it's a bit like having a number of conveyor belts that are running through your business. The same product can actually sit on each of these conveyor belts, but because the conveyor belts are all running with different capacities, down here at the customer end, they're buying them differently. So the same product could have a different package on it, a different speed of delivery, a different pricing strategy, all sorts of things. And so it could be the same product, but it actually delivered in a different way. It could be coming out of different factories, etc. And so that's what we've got to try to get used to, not this idea that different products go down different supply chains, which is not absolutely right. So coming back to that point I made earlier about the underlying patterns, this is what it looks like. We've had a lot of success with some of our clients where we've been able to identify what the base load is and take that off the table and satisfy customers on a regularly weekly basis by delivering 60 or 70% of the moving average of their demand, and then come back, the following week and do the top up. So we're trying to separate the base load out from this stuff, which then allows the amount of volatility to reduce. Now, as I mentioned earlier, of course, given COVID, which I would call a black swan event, we're now faced with the prospect that we're going to be managing in a world where we'll have, quite a lot of volatility, as I talked about, but every now and again we're going to have a black swan event, a bit like this that we also talk. So whereas before, I was thinking in terms of the fully flexible supply chain, maybe being really a part-time capability inside the business, I'm convinced now that enough is happening in the world and there are enough bad things happening that most companies who can afford the resources need to start putting in place a fully flexible supply chain capability that has a group of dedicated people and who will, actually manage through that in a very manual way, but calling upon whatever alliances and whatever they can get their hands on to solve the problem of an extreme disruption that's occurring, just as we've seen during COVID. It really is becoming a full-time activity and capability which some of the bigger firms in the audience would do well, I think, to start putting together not only a full-time capability inside the business and running scenarios to get them ready and using modelling to help them, but also begin to build alliances with other companies in the industry or even competitors to say, hey, when we do have a major problem, we will work to help each other, because very few, even countries, have got the resources. We've had major bushfires in Australia and we've been calling upon resources out of California to bring over water tankers, aerial water tankers, to help us out. And at the same time, or following that, we've just been helping them out, sending equipment over and men to help them out. So even at the country level, when we have disasters, we do need to have pre-thought how we're going to handle these black swan events. And then, of course, the rest of the volatility needs to be covered with these sort of portfolio of supply chains which have different capabilities and have different KPIs and have different types of people, but the portfolio is total, and these are the four that we're going to use or to need to run our business as usual. Just going back to that, presenting it in a different way, there's our business as usual, developing our different responses to the different demands, and here's our freestanding fully flexible supply chain, which comes out as required. So really what we are starting to see is the need to have different combinations, and the combinations will be different for every company. But I mean, I've just shown two options here where, for instance, in one company, a big part of its business, it'll be lean, it'll have a lean infrastructure in its DCs, in its production, and then sitting on top of that lean, it will have capabilities to deliver collaborative lean campaign and agile responses. And then sitting beside that, a fully flexible capability. Or it may be that the lean component, where you are making the efficiency side of the business, is smaller, and that we need, freestanding campaign project type of network and a freestanding agile network for our spare parts and service, and a freestanding fully flexible supply chain for the very disruptive events. So it's really the only way you can sort of come to this, which is the right design or something in between, is understanding what the structure of your marketplace is in terms of the percentage size and importance of the different behavioural segments. So it comes down to this, that we've been, and this is where most of you will still be, you're managing your businesses like this, vertically, where we're dipping into our supply side with procurement strategies which are probably not that good. We're servicing our market, our demand markets, again, with strategies which are one size fits all, and we're struggling to get all that through the firm as we move from left to right. What we need is some type of template or heuristic to help us understand, to clean all this up, and the alignment model that I've shown and which you can read about in our books, and in particular understanding the structure of your market, so looking to understand what the structure of your market is in South Africa or wherever else, and at the same time looking in the same way at your supply market, and then putting together teams which will help drive these horizontal flows at the same time as keeping in place the functional experts. But a lot of these teams are obviously going to be made up of people who have been seconded out of here. So the total headcount doesn't change. It's just that the way it's distributed. And it looks, if you want to look more in an organisational sense, it looks a bit like this. And companies like Zara are working this way now, and Adidas and Li & Fung in Asia. In fact, Li & Fung has got multiple teams of 30 or 40 or 50 people together, multidisciplinary, connected to each other, but specialists in this case in dealing with creative solutions for the fully flexible supply chain. Here, the agile teams looking at speed. Here, the campaign supply chains looking at the project world. Here, the lean teams looking at the sources and the markets for lean and so on. And look, you can have any combination of these. You could have this team here working with a group of suppliers who have been selected because they can give low-cost, high-quality components. And then this team might be working with this team up here to put together in a very quick time assemblies that can be delivered out here to customers who are looking for a quick response. Now, of course, the problem is in the recent article from McKinsey's made the point that it comes down eventually to culture. And they did a bit of work looking at the negative correlation with economic performance for, say, if there was an aversion for risk inside the organisation, this then has a negative impact on performance. If you have that siloed mindset that I talked about earlier, it's even bigger, the negative impact on performance. And another one, which is now becoming obvious, is that this non-digital, this resistance to digital, is actually having a negative impact. And these are only three of the sort of factors involved in shaping culture. But what I would argue that in these teams, these multidisciplinary teams, not only do we want the different disciplines actually represented, but we also want to look at the individual mindset of people as we put them in teams, so that the bias in this team is creativity, the bias in here is speed, the bias in here is on budget, on time, the bias in here is low cost, and the bias in here is relationship. So that you build these different biases into these teams and you genetically engineer them so that you start getting a closer alignment between what you're offering to what your customers are buying. Now, in the world we're living in, of course, those of you who haven't started to digitise your supply chains are in dead trouble, because the only way we're going to improve resilience is by connecting all the parts of our supply chain right through to the end customer. And we need to look at our processes again. We need to connect them either through using our own systems or using track and trace mechanisms that I mentioned here, using demand sensing to pick up any shifts that are coming or external threats from the marketplace. And once we start getting a continuity of the data collected across here, we will start to get the visibility we need to make quicker decisions, because at the end of the day, it's the speed of decision making which will drive the speed of our response. And that is what our customers are looking for. And so one example of this at the sort of real-time timing is the control tower. Some of the major corporations I've seen around the world are putting together control towers, literally looking like an airport control tower with people inside who are seeing the process of an order from the time of delivery, from the time of delivery through to the proof of delivery here. And as soon as something goes wrong, they pick up the alert and they can do something immediately to satisfy the customer. That's the sort of thing. And if you haven't got yourself on this journey, then I'm going to suggest very quickly that you get involved with a 3PL like Imperial Logistics or someone like that who have been investing in technology, and it can build the bridge and get you on track quicker than you could do for yourself. This is an example of what I've just been talking about, where the physical supply chain looks like this, the digital supply chain, which is that sort of replica, that digital twin at the real time. That's the control tower view, which as you start to run over time and build up and aggregate the data from here, you start to be able to design models that can look at the tactics and run scenarios for the short to medium term and even the long term, so you can change your infrastructure. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things you might want to do if you're not on that track already is to go to a 4PL or a really good 3PL who can bring some of this technology and skill and capability to you in an immediate sense, to get you on board with sort of monitoring your daily operations and creating an exceptions management capability, which is going to help you manage your customers. So in closing, what I'm really saying is that there is the keys to resilience, and these can't all be got out quickly, is have a look at this idea of the multiple supply chains that I'm talking about, which is then going to require differentiated strategies as a result. And then that will require some subcultures inside the business to drive these strategies. The overall organisation has to increase its clock speed. So you need to be thinking like Zara, like a fashion company, where they have fine-tuned their internal processes and their decision-making so that there's hardly any gap. You know, there's only like a 15-day cycle time between when they design a product and when they sell it. And if you can get the gap down to that sort of level, then there is very little likelihood of markdowns and losses along the way. Digitization is going to be absolutely mandatory for you to see what's happening and trace what's happening and provide the governance that your customers are going to require, that what they are buying is what they're getting. You in turn are going to have to start really managing your supply chains and understanding where you're going to put the buffers, who you're going to source from, and what sort of network design you're going to need going forward. And having done that, just have a small group inside the business who can be very creative in coming up with innovations and create what we call the flywheel effect, where you're doing absolutely the right things but doing them faster and faster and faster, and that is going to drive your business, drive the growth in your business. So I hope that's given you some idea, and I'm sorry that I've run out of time here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hello, it's me. I'm back.
Yep.
We do have questions, but unfortunately we are running a bit over time, and that's very unfortunate, I think, because of our little glitch in the beginning. But would you be prepared to stick around for an hour and a half, and we can send people to one of the tables in the lounge to chat with you, because there are some questions.
Well, the other one, why don't you do this? Get them just to, I can't stay around, unfortunately, but what about if you just get them to send them to me?
Okay.
You send them to me, and then I'll answer them all in writing.
Okay, perfect. John, thank you so much for an absolutely phenomenal presentation. I think lots of food for thought. Understanding your customer, is your supply chain geared to support your customers' buying behaviours? Yep. Collaborate to ensure success. That's collaboration is key to anything, especially in risk scenarios. Always have a risk strategy, and I think that's where many, many businesses got tripped up. You need to think of any eventuality that could possibly happen, and digitise. I think that needs to come through strongly, and you all need to take that on board. And if you're not already on that journey, start planning to adapt.
Right.
Thank you for your time. Very much appreciated.
All the best, and you'll hear a little bit more from Deb later on. I'm sure she won't have the same glitch.
It happens to everybody. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye, Sonia.
Bye. So I'm sorry we couldn't get to the questions. There were some really, really good ones in the session. We will get John's details across to you so you can send him a note. Please don't forget to complete the poll before we move over to the next session. You don't need to go anywhere. You'll automatically be transferred into our next keynote. So we are watching you complete the polls. We can see who doesn't do it. As they say, Big Brother is watching you. This platform has lots of power.